The metal detector beeped against the submarine's interior wall. And that's when Rebecca Chen realized the scrap metal she'd bought for $50 wasn't just rusting steel. It was a time capsule worth more than she could comprehend. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The salvage auction yard stretched along the industrial waterfront like a graveyard of forgotten naval history. Decommissioned vessels lined the concrete piers, their paint peeling. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Their stories ending in the anonymous hands of scrap merchants and metal recyclers. Morning fog rolled off the Pacific, turning everything grey and ghostly. Rebecca stood with her 8-year-old daughter Lily at the edge of the crowd, both of them shivering in jackets too thin for the October chill. At 32, Rebecca had hands that told stories callused from double shifts at the cannery, scarred from that time she'd tried to fix their apartment's broken heater herself, permanently stained from the industrial cleaning jobs she took on weekends. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her sneakers had holes she'd tried to patch with duct tape. She didn't belong here, among the contractors and salvage professionals with their clipboards and confident bids, but she was here anyway, clutching a newspaper ad she'd circled 3 days ago in desperation. Naval surplus auction. All items sold as is. Cash only. Viewing starts 8 a.m. Lily tugged on her mother's sleeve, pointing toward the far end of the pier. "Mom, look at that one." Rebecca followed her daughter's gaze. There, partially submerged in a concrete basin, sat what looked like a submarine. Or rather, what had once been a submarine. Now, it was a rusted hulk, listing heavily to one side. Its conning tower, barely visible above the waterline. Its hull covered in barnacles and marine growth. A faded sign dangled from a chain. Lot 23. Former. Research vessel. Minimum bid, $50. Buyer responsible for all removal and disposal costs. "That's not a submarine, baby," Rebecca said softly. "That's a disaster waiting to happen." But she couldn't look away. There was something about it, something that pulled at her. Maybe it was the way the morning light caught the curve of its hull. Maybe it was the sheer impossibility of a submarine being sold for $50. Or maybe it was just desperation making her see opportunities where none existed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice crackled through a bullhorn. "Let's begin. First up, Lot 1. Radar equipment from a Coast Guard cutter." Rebecca half listened as items sold. Brass fittings for $300. Navigation equipment for $800. A ship's bell for $250. Each amount was more than she had. Her purse held exactly $73. This week's tips from the diner, where she waitressed 3 nights a week. Money that was supposed to go toward Lily's school supplies and the electricity bill that was 2 months overdue. Lot 23, the auctioneer called. Former research submarine, designation RS-147. Approximately 60 feet in length. Decommissioned 1992. Sold as is. Where is? Minimum bid $50. Do I hear 50? Silence fell over the yard. Men looked at the half-sunken vessel and shook their heads. One laughed outright. Another muttered something about death traps and lawsuit waiting to happen. Rebecca's hand went to her purse. $50. It was almost nothing. It was also everything she had for the next 3 days until her cannery paycheck came through. "Come on, folks," the auctioneer pressed. "That's a lot of steel sitting there. Scrap value alone is worth less than the cost to pump it out and tow it." A man interrupted. He wore expensive work boots and had the confident air of someone who knew the salvage business. "That thing's been underwater for how long? 2 years? 3? Interiors probably. Flooded. Structure compromised. You'd spend 10 grand trying to raise it. Another 20 cutting it up. Minimum bid should be -50. You should pay us to take it." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Rebecca felt it again. That pull. Everyone was walking away. Everyone saw worthless scrap. But she saw something else. She saw the newspaper article she'd read last week about a sunken yacht in Florida that had turned out to contain valuable artifacts. She saw the documentary Lily had made her watch about treasure hunters finding gold in unexpected places. She saw a chance. $50, Rebecca called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Heads turned. The confident man in expensive boots looked at her like she'd sprouted a second head. Lady, do you have any idea what you're bidding on? A submarine, Rebecca said quietly. For $50. A sinking submarine. A liability. You'll never get it out of that basin. Then why do you care if I bid? The man's jaw tightened. He looked at the vessel again, clearly calculating whether there was something he'd missed. Then he shook his head and walked away, muttering, $50. The auctioneer repeated. Do I hear 60? The silence stretched. Rebecca's heart hammered. Lily gripped her hand tightly. Going once. Going twice. Sold to the lady for $50. Ma'am, you can settle up at the office. Applause broke out. But it wasn't congratulatory. It was mocking. People clapped slowly, dramatically, like she'd just performed a comedy routine. Rebecca's face burned, but she kept her head high and walked toward the payment office with Lily at her side. Mom, Lily whispered. Why are they laughing? Because they think we made a mistake. Did we? Rebecca looked back at the submarine, at her impossible purchase. I don't know, baby. But we're about to find out. The payment process was humiliating. The clerk, a woman with perfectly manicured nails and a condescending smile, counted Rebecca's crumpled bills and handful of quarters twice, as if hoping they'd amount to something different. You understand you're responsible for all salvage and removal costs, she said. The marina wants that basin cleared within 60 days, or they'll charge you storage fees. $200 per week. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She'd just bought a submarine. She had no plan for removing it, no equipment, no expertise, and now a ticking clock. I understand, she said, taking the receipt and keys, actual keys, as if a half-sunken submarine could be locked. As they walked back to their bus stop, Lily was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, she spoke. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Why did you buy a submarine? Really? Rebecca sat on the bench at the bus shelter and pulled Lily close. How could she explain it? How could she tell her daughter that she'd spent their grocery money on a rusted hulk? Because she was tired. Tired of counting pennies and coming up short. Tired of seeing other people succeed while she scraped by. Tired of living in a world where hard work wasn't enough, where you could do everything right and still lose. Because sometimes, baby, Rebecca said slowly, you have to take a chance, even when everyone says you're wrong, even when you're scared, because the only thing worse than failing is never trying at all. Lily considered this seriously. At 8, she'd already learned to be careful, to think before acting, to not ask for things they couldn't afford. Rebecca had made her grow up too fast. Can I see it? Lily asked. The submarine? Rebecca checked her phone. She had 4 hours before her shift at the cannery. Yeah, baby. Let's go see what we bought. They walked back to the salvage yard. This time as owners rather than spectators. The submarine looked even worse up close. The conning tower jutted from the water at a sharp angle. The visible hull was covered in rust and marine growth. Warning signs declared it. Structurally unsound, unsafe for boarding, condemned. Everything about it screamed, mistake. But Rebecca circled it slowly, studying. The basin was maybe 15 feet deep. She could see the bottom through the murky water. The submarine sat on a concrete base, not sunk into mud. That was good, probably. The conning tower hatch was above water, accessible via a maintenance ladder. Someone had left propped against it. I'm going to take a look inside, Rebecca said. Mom, the sign says. I know what it says, but it's my submarine now. I need to know what I bought. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The ladder was sketchy, probably unsafe, definitely not designed for what she was doing. But Rebecca had climbed worse, scaffolding at cleaning jobs, fire escapes to reach locked-out apartments. Life itself had been one precarious ladder after another. She made it to the conning tower hatch and tried the key. To her surprise, it turned. The hatch opened with a screech of protesting metal. Stale air rushed out, but it wasn't the smell of seawater. It was dry air, musty, but dry. Rebecca's pulse quickened. If the interior wasn't flooded, if the hull had held, she climbed down the interior ladder carefully, testing each rung. Her phone's flashlight illuminated a narrow corridor lined with pipes and valves. Everything was covered in dust and grime, but she saw no standing water. The submarine had held. Against all odds, the pressure hull was intact. "Mom." Lily's voice echoed from above. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, baby. Stay up there. I'm just looking around." The submarine's interior was like stepping into a time capsule. Navigation equipment from the early 90s lined the control room, gauges with faded labels, a chart table with yellowed papers still tacked to it. Through narrow hatches, she could see crew quarters, a tiny galley, spaces designed for people who'd worked and lived here. It was in the aft section that Rebecca found the first real clue something was different about this vessel. Where she expected to find engine equipment, she found something else entirely, a sealed bulkhead with a wheel-lock door, like a vault, and above it, barely visible under years of grime, was a brass plate. Research storage. Authorized personnel. Only. Rebecca's hands trembled as she tried the wheel. It was stuck, corroded by time. But as she worked it, it began to turn. 1 revolution. 2. On the third, she heard a click, and the door swung open, on surprisingly smooth hinges. The compartment beyond was different from the rest of the submarine. Climate-controlled, or it had been once. The walls were lined with metal storage cabinets, each with its own lock, and stacked throughout the space were containers, some metal, some reinforced plastic, each marked with codes and dates she didn't understand. Rebecca opened the nearest cabinet with shaking hands. Inside were document folders, all marked classified in faded red stamps. She pulled one out and opened it carefully. Her eyes widened. Deep-sea mineral deposit surveys. Pacific Northwest. 1,989 to 1,991. She grabbed another folder. Rare earth element concentration analysis. Territorial waters. Another. Precious metal recovery feasibility studies. The documents outlined surveys of underwater mineral deposits, rare earth elements, platinum group metals, even gold. The submarine hadn't been military. It had been a research vessel surveying the ocean floor for valuable minerals and metals. And based on these reports, it had found them. But more than that, Rebecca realized as she dug deeper, it had recovered them. The storage containers weren't full of rocks and samples. They were full of processed minerals, refined metals, extracted treasures from the deep ocean, container after container, all carefully catalogued, all valuable. The submarine hadn't just been researching underwater mining. It had been actively mining and refining on a small scale, testing the technology, proving the concept. And then someone had abandoned it all. Rebecca's mind raced. Why would anyone leave this? The answer came from a folder marked Project Termination, Confidential. She read the memo with growing understanding. The research project had been a private venture, funded by a consortium of investors. When one of the major investors died suddenly and the others couldn't agree on how to proceed, the project was dissolved. Legal battles over asset ownership had dragged on for years. By the time the courts settled, the submarine had been forgotten, sitting in this basin slowly sinking while lawyers argued over paperwork. It had been sold at auction not because it was worthless, but because no one remembered what was inside it. Rebecca climbed back to the surface. her mind spinning. Lily was sitting on the dock, drawing pictures in a notebook. "Did you find treasure?" she asked innocently. Rebecca laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Maybe, baby. Maybe we did." That night, after her shift at the cannery, after putting Lily to bed, after double-checking that their apartment door was locked, Rebecca sat at their kitchen table with the folders she'd smuggled out. She'd been too scared to leave them on the submarine, too paranoid that someone might break in and steal what she'd found. The documents were technical, dense with geological terminology and chemical formulas she barely understood. But certain things were clear. The submarine's research had identified deposits of rare earth elements worth millions. The samples they'd extracted and refined sitting right now in those containers were worth hundreds of thousands, possibly more. She found inventory lists. Container 47. B. Platinum group metals. 47 kilograms. Container 52. C. Refined rare earth oxides. Mixed lanthanides. 120 kilograms. Container 66A. Gold concentrate. 23 kilograms. Rebecca had to read that last one 3 times. 23 kilograms of gold concentrate, even accounting for impurities, even assuming it wasn't pure gold, that was potentially worth over $1 million. And that was just one container out of dozens. Her hands shook as she did rough calculations. If even half the inventory was real, if the metals were actually there and in the quantities documented, she was looking at, she couldn't finish the math. The numbers were too big, too impossible. She'd bought a submarine for $50, and it might contain treasures worth tens of millions, possibly more. But who would believe her? More importantly, who could she tell? Rebecca thought about calling her sister in Portland, but Sarah had made her opinion clear last year. You need to be practical, Becca. Stop dreaming and start planning. This would only confirm her sister's worst opinions about her judgment. She thought about her landlord, who was already threatening eviction over late rent. He'd probably try to claim the submarine as payment for what she owed. She thought about the authorities. But who? The salvage yard had sold it, legally. She had the receipt. But the contents, were they legally hers? The documents mentioned private investors, government permits, territorial waters. This could get complicated fast. For now, she decided, she'd tell no one. She'd go back to the submarine tomorrow after work, do a complete inventory, figure out exactly what she had. Then she'd find someone she could trust. A lawyer maybe, or someone who understood maritime salvage law. But as she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, another thought crept in. What if she was wrong? What if those containers were empty or full of worthless samples? What if the real treasures had been removed years ago and only the paperwork remained? What if she really had wasted $50 on a sinking submarine and she was just too desperate to accept it? Morning came with harsh reality. Rebecca's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. for her early shift at the diner. Her body ached from yesterday's climb through the submarine. Her hands were cut from rusty metal, and she had a pounding headache from too little sleep and too much impossible thinking. "Mom?" Lily appeared in her doorway, already dressed for school. "Are you okay?" Rebecca forced a smile. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired." "Because of the submarine?" "Because of everything. Come on, let's get breakfast." They ate generic cereal with milk that was a day past expiration, because Rebecca couldn't afford to waste it. Lily's school shoes were getting too small. Rebecca could see where they pinched, but new ones would have to wait. Everything had to wait. Always waiting. Always one emergency away from disaster. The diner shift was brutal. The morning crowd was grumpy. The tips were terrible. And her manager, Frank, rode her about being 30 seconds late. Clocking in, when a customer complained that his eggs were too runny and refused to pay, Frank docked Rebecca's paycheck to cover it, even though she wasn't the cook. "Maybe you should focus more on work," Frank said, "instead of whatever made you late this morning." I heard you bought a submarine yesterday. He laughed. What's next? A rocket ship. Word traveled fast in their small coastal town. By lunch, 3 different customers had asked her about that submarine thing, their tone making clear they thought it was the punchline to a joke. Rebecca kept her head down and worked, but inside, something was hardening. Let them laugh. Let them think she was crazy. She'd show them all. Her shift ended at 2 p.m. She had 90 minutes before Lily's school let out. Rebecca went straight to the salvage yard, climbed that rickety ladder again, and descended into her submarine with new determination. This time she came prepared with better flashlights, gloves, a crowbar to help open stuck containers, and a notebook to document everything. She started systematically, photographing each container, recording its number, opening it carefully. Container 47B was real. Heavy ingots of silvery metal platinum, group alloys according to the labels. They were small, each about the size of a deck of cards, but dense. Rebecca's hands shook as she lifted one. This could be worth thousands, tens of thousands. Container 52C contained bags of powder and small rocks, rare earth oxides. The labels claimed these were purified lanthanides, essential for electronics manufacturing. Rebecca had no way to verify their value, but the documentation suggested they were worth hundreds of dollars per kilogram, and there were 120 kilograms. Container 66A was locked with a different, more serious lock. Rebecca couldn't open it with what she had, but she could feel its weight when she tried to move it. Heavy, very heavy. If the inventory was right, if this really contained gold concentrate. She was moving toward more containers when she heard voices above. Men's voices, getting closer. Told you, nobody pays attention to these old basins. Perfect place to check it out before anyone else realizes. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Someone else was coming. She killed her flashlight and pressed herself into a shadowy corner of the research storage compartment. Footsteps clanged on the exterior ladder. The conning tower hatch opened with that distinctive screech. More footsteps descending. Flashlight beams swept the interior. Jesus, this thing's been picked clean. Nothing but junk. That was one voice, young and disappointed. Check the back sections. Research subs sometimes had sealed compartments for samples and equipment. Could be something valuable. An older voice, more experienced. They were getting closer. Rebecca's mind raced. She couldn't be caught in here, but there was no other way out. She was trapped. The voices grew nearer, just one bulkhead away. Rebecca spotted a narrow space between stacked containers, where she might hide. She squeezed in just as light swept into the storage compartment. Holy shit, Carlos. Look at this. What the hell? Is this all samples? Equipment? Check the containers, man. Hurry. Rebecca held her breath as the 2 men entered her hiding spot. Through a gap, she could see them, one younger, maybe mid-20s with a scruffy beard, the other older with a shaved head, and the cautious movements of someone who'd done questionable things before. This one's got metal in it. Heavy stuff. Could be valuable. What about documentation? We need to know what this stuff is worth before we move it. The younger man was poring through the very folders Rebecca had looked at yesterday. Looks like rare earth elements. Platinum. Says something about gold concentrate too. Gold? The older man's voice got sharp. Where? Container 66A. It's locked though. So, we cut the lock. But first, the older man swept his flashlight around the compartment more carefully. Rebecca pressed deeper into her hiding space, her heart hammering so loud she was sure they'd hear it. The beam passed within inches of her face. She didn't breathe, didn't blink, became stone. First, we need to figure out who owns this. The salvage yard sold it last week, according to the notices. But to who? Does it matter? Possession is 9/10, man. We take this stuff now, sell it fast. Nobody knows the difference. It matters because if someone bought this legally, if they have papers, we're not just salvaging. We're stealing. That's different heat. Rebecca's mind worked frantically. They'd come back. Maybe today, maybe tonight. They'd come with tools to cut locks, with vehicles to haul containers away, and she had no way to stop them. She couldn't call the police, she'd have to explain how she found this, and these documents might not actually belong to her. The legal situation was murky at best. The men spent another 20 minutes investigating, taking photos with their phones, making plans. Finally, they left, arguing about the best approach. Rebecca waited until their voices faded completely before extracting herself from her hiding spot. Her legs had cramped, her back screamed, and her hands were bleeding from where she'd gripped sharp metal. But her mind was clear. She had, maybe hours, certainly less than a day, before those men came back. If they beat her to it, she'd lose everything. The submarine, the treasures, her one chance to change their lives. She needed help, real help, people she could trust. Rebecca climbed out of the submarine, faster than was probably safe, scraped her arm badly on the ladder, and ran for the bus stop. She had 40 minutes to get to Lily's school. On the way, she made a call she'd been avoiding for 2 years. Dave's Marine Salvage. A gruff voice answered. Dave? It's Rebecca Chen. A pause. Rebecca? Jesus, I haven't heard from you since you were married to my cousin and then cheated on her. I know, but I need your help. Another pause. This is unexpected. I bought a submarine. You. What? I bought a submarine at the Naval surplus auction. For $50. It's in the basin at the salvage yard. I need help getting it out of there. Tonight. As fast as possible. Rebecca, do you have any idea how much it costs to... I'll pay you. I'll pay you a lot. But I need it done tonight, and I need you to not ask questions. She could hear him thinking. Dave was a salvage expert, had all the equipment, could raise a submarine if anyone could. He was also perpetually short on cash and had a weakness for big scores. How much is a lot? He asked. 20% of what's inside. What's inside? Something worth your time. I promise. But Dave, if you try to screw me on this, if you try to take more than your share, I'll make sure everyone knows, including my cousin, including your current wife. He laughed, surprised. Damn, Rebecca. You grew some teeth since I saw you last. Okay, I'm interested. But I need more than vague promises. Meet me at the salvage yard at 10 p.m. tonight. Bring whatever equipment you need to raise a 60-foot submarine and tow it to private storage. I'll explain everything then. Come alone. Rebecca. She hung up and immediately regretted it. Dave was a creep and a cheat, but he was good at his job. And right now, she needed good more than she needed trustworthy. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. She picked up Lily from school, made her spaghetti for dinner, helped with homework, all while her mind churned with logistics and worry. At 8 p.m., she called Mrs. Park next door, the elderly widow who sometimes watched Lily in emergencies. I hate to ask, Rebecca said, but I have to deal with something tonight. Could Lily sleep at your place? Just for a few hours? Mrs. Park clucked her tongue. Of course, dear. Everything all right? It will be. I hope. Lily was suspicious. Mom, what's going on? Rebecca knelt to her daughter's level. Remember how I said sometimes you have to take chances? Tonight's one of those times. I need to secure our submarine before something bad happens to it. Can you be brave and stay with Mrs. Park? Lily studied her mother's face with eyes too old for 8 years. This is about the treasure, isn't it? The stuff you found. Rebecca hadn't told her anything specific, but Lily was smart. Too smart. Yeah, baby. It's about the treasure. Then go fight for it, Mom, like you taught me. Rebecca hugged her daughter fiercely, then walked her next door. Mrs. Park asked no questions, just promised hot chocolate and cartoons. Rebecca left before she could change her mind. The salvage yard was dark at 10 p.m., lit only by security lights that barely penetrated the fog rolling off the water. Rebecca waited by the gate, checking her phone obsessively. At 10:07, headlights appeared, a pickup truck, pulling a massive trailer. Dave climbed out. He looked older than she remembered, more weathered. A lifetime on the water did that to people. "All right," he said without preamble. "Show me what we're dealing with." Rebecca led him to the cons basin. In the darkness, the submarine looked even more ominous, like a great beast sleeping beneath the surface. Dave swept it with a powerful flashlight, muttering calculations under his breath. "You're serious about this?" he said finally. "You actually want to raise this thing tonight?" "I am." "Can you do it?" "Oh, I can do it. Got industrial pumps in the truck, airbags, the works. Question is whether she'll hold together when we lift her. Submarine's been underwater. How long? 2 or 3 years. Dave whistled. That's a long time. Hull could be compromised. She might fall apart on us. She won't. The pressure hull is intact. I've been inside. You've been Jesus, Rebecca. That's insanely dangerous. Can you do it or not? He studied her in the dim light. You've really changed. You know that? Used to be you couldn't even ask for ketchup at a restaurant. Now you're planning night operations and blackmailing your ex-cousin-in-law. Desperate times. Yes or no, Dave? Yes. But I want to see inside first. Want to know what I'm getting 20% of. Rebecca had expected this. She couldn't show him everything he'd tried to renegotiate, or just take it all. But she needed his help, which meant giving him enough to commit. She led him down into the submarine, showed him the research storage compartment, and opened one of the smaller containers. Container 52C with the rare earth oxides. Dave's flashlight played over the bags of powder and processed ore. He picked up a bag, tested its weight, examined the labels. Holy Mother of Rebecca, do you know what this is? Rare earth elements. Valuable. Valuable. This stuff is essential for manufacturing. Permanent magnets, batteries, all kinds of tech. And it's mostly controlled by China, which means Western companies pay premium prices. This one bag could be worth $10,000. And you've got, what, 100 bags here? Plus the other containers. Dave looked at her with new respect. You really found a treasure ship? A modern one. Where the hell did this come from? Rebecca gave him the abbreviated version. The research project. The abandoned work. The forgotten submarine. As she talked, she saw Dave's mind working, calculating his share. 20%, he said slowly. Of everything in here? Everything. But we do this my way, legally, properly. We document it all, get proper assessments, do this right. Why? We could sell this stuff on the black market, pocket everything. Nobody knows. Because I have a daughter to raise. I'm not doing anything that could land me in jail or put her at risk. We do this legally or not at all. Dave considered this. Rebecca held her breath. If he walked away now, she'd lose everything. But if he agreed to her terms, all right, he said finally. Legal it is. But Rebecca, once word gets out about what's in here, you're going to have problems. People who think they have claims. The original investors or their heirs. The government. Maybe. This isn't going to be simple. I know. But first, we have to secure it. Can you get this submarine to private storage tonight? Yeah. But it'll take hours. Better get comfortable. The operation was tense and technical. Dave's industrial pumps worked to expel water from the submarine's ballast tanks. Airbags were positioned around the hull. Slowly, incrementally, the submarine began to rise. Rebecca watched from the dock, her heart in her throat. Every creak of stressed metal made her flinch. What if the hull cracked? What if everything inside was ruined? What if those 2 men from earlier showed up? That last fear proved prescient. At 1:30 a.m., just as the submarine broke fully free of the water, headlights appeared at the salvage yard entrance. 2 vehicles, a van, and a pickup truck. Dave, Rebecca said urgently. We've got company. Dave looked up from his controls. Friends of yours? The opposite. Can we move faster? Not without risking everything. We're almost there. Just need to get her onto the trailer. The vehicles were getting closer. Rebecca's mind raced. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? I'm at the harborside salvage yard. There are men here trying to steal my property. I need police immediately. She gave the address and hung up. The vehicles were close enough now that she could see figures inside 3 men in the van. 2 in the truck. More than she'd expected. They were committed, equipped, ready to take what they'd found. The van's side door slid open. Men climbed out carrying tools, bolt cutters, crowbars, a cutting torch. They weren't here to talk. Dave, Rebecca said quietly, I need you to keep working. Don't stop, no matter what happens. Rebecca, what are you? She stepped forward into the light, where the men could see her. 5 of them, including the 2 she'd hidden from earlier. The older bald man stopped when he saw her. You, he said. You're the woman who bought this thing. That's right. It's mine. You're trespassing. The younger man laughed. Did you hear that, Carlos? We're trespassing. Carlos, the older man, was smarter. His eyes narrowed. You've been inside. You know what's in there. That's why you're here in the middle of the night. I know it's mine. Legally purchased, legally owned. And I've already called the police. They're on their way. That caused some hesitation. The men looked at each other. One started to back toward the van. She's bluffing, another man said. Come on, we're wasting time. They started forward. Rebecca's hands clenched. Behind her, she heard Dave's equipment grinding. The submarine rising onto the trailer. They just needed a few more minutes. I'm not bluffing, Rebecca said. And you're about to make the biggest mistake of your lives. That submarine is empty. We already moved the contents to secure storage. All you'll find in there is rust and paperwork. It was a lie, but a calculated one. If they believed her, if they thought they were too late. Bullshit, the younger man said. We saw the containers. We photographed everything. You photographed empty spaces. The valuable contents were removed 3 hours ago. What you saw was a fraction of what was there, and it's gone. So, unless you want to be arrested for attempted theft of an empty submarine, I suggest you leave. Carlos studied her. She could see him weighing options, calculating risks. The sound of sirens in the distance made his decision. Let's go, he said. This was a bust anyway. But Carlos, I said, let's go. They piled back into their vehicles and sped away just as police cruisers pulled into the salvage yard. Rebecca's legs nearly gave out with relief. The police took statements, examined the submarine, looked skeptical about the whole situation, but ultimately agreed that Rebecca had been threatened. They promised increased patrols and took descriptions of the men and their vehicles. By 4 a.m., the submarine was secured on Dave's trailer, ready to be towed to private storage. Rebecca stood next to it, exhausted beyond measure, hands shaking with adrenaline crash. You held your own there, Dave said. Impressive. I was terrified. Yeah, but you didn't show it. That's what counts. So where do you want me to take her? Rebecca gave him the address of a storage facility she'd researched, one with climate control and 24-hour security. It would cost money she didn't have, but that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, she'd won. The sun was rising as Rebecca finally made it back to Mrs. Park's apartment. She found Lily asleep on the couch, exhausted from staying up worrying about her mother. Mrs. Park handed Rebecca coffee without comment, just squeezed her hand in a gesture of support. Thank you, Rebecca whispered. You did what you had to do. Now go home and sleep, both of you. But Rebecca couldn't sleep. Once Lily was safely in her own bed, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with her phone and started making calls. She needed a lawyer. She needed someone who understood maritime salvage law, mineral rights, and how to protect her claim against inevitable challenges. It took 6 calls before she found someone willing to listen. A young lawyer named Jennifer Kim, who specialized in maritime cases and had a reputation for taking on difficult clients. Let me get this straight, Jennifer said over the phone. You bought a decommissioned submarine for $50. and it contains millions in rare earth minerals and precious metals from an abandoned research project. That's correct. And you've already faced one attempted theft. That's also correct. A pause. Miss Chen, I have to ask, have you verified that these materials are actually yours? Maritime salvage law is complex. The original project investors might have claims. The government might have claims if this work was done in territorial waters or with federal permits. I know. That's why I'm calling you. I need help navigating this legally. All right. I'll need to see all your documentation. The purchase receipt, the project files, inventory lists, everything. And Miss Chen, this is going to get complicated. Very complicated. I understand. When can we meet? They scheduled an appointment for the next morning. Rebecca hung up and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd set in motion. She'd protected the submarine, secured the treasures, and taken the first steps toward claiming them legally. But Jennifer was right. The hard part was just beginning. Over the next week, Rebecca's life became a whirlwind of lawyers, experts, and assessments. Jennifer brought in specialists to examine the materials. What they found exceeded even Rebecca's hopes. The submarine contained 47 containers of refined rare earth elements, oxides, alloys, and pure samples. Current market value, approximately $8.3 million. 23 containers of platinum group metals, mostly refined and ready for industrial use. Value, $27 million. 16 containers of various other strategic minerals, tantalum, niobium, cobalt. Value, $4.6 million. And container 66A, when finally opened by a professional locksmith, contained exactly what the inventory claimed, 23 kilograms of gold concentrate. After refining, it would yield approximately 19 kilograms of pure gold. At current prices, nearly $1.2 million. The total value of the submarine's contents, conservatively estimated $41 million. Rebecca had spent $50 and found $41 million. But as Jennifer had warned, the discovery triggered immediate complications. The original research project's investors, or rather, their heirs and corporate successors, filed claims. They argued the materials had never been legally abandoned, only stored. The submarine's sale hadn't included rights to its contents. The federal government got involved, questioning whether the underwater mining permits had included rights to keep extracted materials or merely to study them. Environmental groups raised concerns about deep-sea mining and whether any sales of these materials should be allowed to proceed. And media attention was relentless. Single mother strikes gold in submarine made national headlines. Rebecca's photo was everywhere. Reporters camped outside their apartment. Lily couldn't go to school without being mobbed by questions. The pressure was immense. Multiple parties offered to resolve the situation, usually meaning Rebecca would receive a modest payment while they took the bulk of the value. One offer was for $2 million, paid immediately, no further claims. "Take it," Rebecca's sister Sarah urged over the phone. $2 million, Becca. You'd never have to worry about money again. You could give Lily everything she needs. But Jennifer advised against it. These offers are lowball. They're trying to take advantage of your inexperience and the stress you're under. Maritime salvage law is clear. You purchased the submarine and its contents legally. You have strong claim to ownership. Let's fight this properly. The legal battle took months. Dave, true to his word, testified about the submarine's condition and the salvage operation. He'd earned his 20% over $8 million, and to Rebecca's surprise, he'd been honorable about it. "I was a shit husband to your cousin," he admitted during one of their meetings. "But I'm trying to be better now. This score, it lets me make things right with some people. Thanks for giving me the chance." Mrs. Park turned out to be an unexpected ally. When reporters harassed Lily, she'd march out and shoo them away with surprising ferocity. When Rebecca was overwhelmed, She'd watch Lily without being asked. When Rebecca couldn't afford to pay her, she'd refuse payment entirely. "I had nothing once too," Mrs. Park said. "Came here from Korea with 2 suitcases and no English. People helped me then. I help you now. That's how it works." The legal resolution came suddenly, as these things often do. The various parties reached a settlement. Rebecca would retain ownership of the materials, but pay a percentage to the original investor's heirs, 12% of the net value. The government would receive assurances about proper environmental documentation for any future sales. Environmental groups would get funding for deep-sea conservation studies. When the accounting was finally complete, when all claims were settled and all taxes paid, Rebecca Chen's net proceeds came to $28.4 million. She'd bought a submarine for $50. She'd walked away with more than $28 million. The news hit on a Tuesday. Jennifer called with the final numbers, her voice barely able to contain excitement. Rebecca hung up and sat very still at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd counted quarters and worried about electricity bills. "Mom?" Lily appeared in the doorway. "Home from school. Are you crying?" "Yeah, baby." "Happy crying or sad crying?" Rebecca laughed through her tears. "Very, very happy crying. Come here." She pulled Lily close and told her everything. They were financially secure. More than secure, wealthy beyond anything Rebecca had dared imagine. Lily could go to any college she wanted. They could buy a house, a real house with a yard, and a bedroom for each of them. They could help Mrs. Park and others who'd supported them. "What will we do with the submarine?" Lily asked. It was a good question. Rebecca had given it thought. "I want to turn it into a museum. A place where kids can learn about ocean research, about science and technology, about how sometimes taking a chance on something everyone else has given up on can lead to amazing discoveries." Over the following months, that vision became reality. Rebecca purchased a plot of land near the harbor and had the submarine transported there. With help from engineers and historians, they restored the interior, created educational exhibits, and opened the Chen Marine Science Center. It became one of the region's most popular educational attractions. School groups came to explore the submarine, learn about ocean mining, and hear the story of how a single mother with $50 had found millions. But Rebecca made sure the story was told completely, not just the treasure part, but the struggle part, the fear, the mockery, the times she'd almost given up. The lesson wasn't just that treasures exist, it was that ordinary people could find them if they were brave enough to look. Frank, her former manager at the diner, came to the museum's opening. He found Rebecca during the reception. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. "I'm sorry. I saw someone struggling, and instead of helping, I kicked you when you were down. That was wrong." Rebecca looked at the man who'd made her life harder when it was already hard enough. She could have been petty, could have reminded him of every cruel comment. Instead, she said, "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to apologize." She hired him as the museum's operations manager. He was good at logistics, good at running things, and he'd learned humility. Patricia Morgan, a marine biologist who'd lost her research funding, became the museum's head educator. Carlos, the man who'd tried to steal from the submarine, wrote Rebecca a letter from prison where he was serving time for an unrelated theft. He apologized and asked if she'd speak to his daughter, who was interested in science but growing up like he had, thinking crime was the only way out of poverty. Rebecca met with the girl, 15-year-old Maria, and told her story. Not a sanitized version, but the real one. The fear, the desperate choices, the luck that could have gone either way. "I'm not special," Rebecca told Maria. "I'm not smarter or braver than anyone else. I was just desperate enough to take a chance when everyone said I was crazy. And that's available to you too. Not submarines, obviously, but chances, opportunities everyone else overlooks because they seem too small or too weird or too unlikely. Those are the ones that can change everything." Maria became one of the museum's junior volunteers, later earned a full scholarship to study environmental science. 2 years after buying the submarine, Rebecca stood in front of it with Lily. The submarine had been cleaned and restored, painted in historically accurate colors. Its conning tower gleamed in the afternoon sun. Inside, children explored and learned, their excited voices echoing through spaces where Rebecca had once hidden from thieves. "Do you ever regret it?" Lily asked. She was 10 now, taller, more confident. Spending that $50? Rebecca thought about all the impossible things that had followed that choice. The fear, the legal battles, the transformation of their lives. She thought about the people they'd helped, the museum they'd built, the story they'd created. Not even for a second. Baby, not even for a second. That evening, after the museum closed and the visitors had gone, Rebecca did what she'd taken to doing most nights. She walked through the submarine alone, trailing her fingers along the walls, remembering. She remembered the terror of opening that first container, not knowing if she'd found treasure or nothing. She remembered hiding from men who wanted to take it all. She remembered the moment the police came, the moment Dave's equipment lifted the submarine from the water, the moment Jennifer told her the final settlement number. But most of all, she remembered standing at that auction, $50 in her hand, everyone laughing, everyone sure she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She'd been terrified then. She was terrified now, but differently. Now she was terrified of playing it safe, of letting fear stop her, of going back to being the woman who counted quarters and apologized for existing. That woman had bought a submarine. That woman had changed everything. In the main exhibit hall, there was a plaque she'd written herself. It said, "On October 15th, a single mother with $50 took a chance everyone said was crazy. This submarine sat in a basin for 3 years while hundreds of experts walked past it, seeing only scrap metal and trouble. One person saw possibility. This museum exists because sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones everyone else has given up on, including yourself." Rebecca touched the plaque, then locked up the museum and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. But tonight, she'd done what she set out to do. She'd taken the biggest risk of her life, and she'd won. Not just money, though that certainly helped. She'd won something more important, proof that she was more than the world had told her she was. More than a struggling single mother working multiple jobs. More than someone to be dismissed and overlooked. She was someone who'd seen treasure where others saw trash. Who'd fought when others would have fled. Who'd held onto hope when everyone said she was foolish. She was Rebecca Chen, and she'd bought a submarine for $50 and found $41 million inside. But more than that, she'd found herself, and that, she thought as she tucked Lily into bed that night, was the greatest treasure of all. 5 years after buying the submarine, Rebecca stood at a podium addressing the National Marine Science Foundation's annual conference. The ballroom was filled with scientists, educators, and policymakers. People who belonged in rooms like this. People she'd once served coffee to without them seeing her face. "The ocean covers 70% of our planet," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the 1,000 eyes watching her. "And we know less about it than we know about the surface of Mars. But what we do know is that our oceans hold treasures beyond imagination, not just minerals and metals, but knowledge itself." She clicked to the next slide, showing the submarine as it had looked when she'd bought it. Rusted, half-sunk, dismissed by everyone who'd seen it. "5 years ago, I paid $50 for what everyone called a piece of junk. Today, the Chen Marine Science Center serves over 50,000 students annually. We've awarded $2 million in scholarships to students pursuing ocean sciences, and we've proven that when you invest in what others overlook, the returns can change everything." The applause was generous, but Rebecca had learned to read audiences. Some people were inspired, others were skeptical she was still the waitress who'd gotten lucky, not a real scientist or expert. That was fine. She'd stopped needing everyone's approval years ago. After her presentation, a man in an expensive suit approached. He had the look of money, not new money trying to impress, but old money that didn't need to try. "Miss Chen, I'm Victor Ashford. I represent the Ashford Foundation. We fund ocean research initiatives." "I'm familiar with your foundation," Rebecca said carefully. "You've done important work. We'd like to do more. Specifically, we'd like to fund an expansion of your museum, double its size, create a research wing, establish a fellowship program for underprivileged students interested in marine sciences." Rebecca's instinct was to say yes immediately. More funding meant more students helped, more programs offered. But she'd learned to ask questions first. "What do you want in return?" Victor smiled. "Direct. I appreciate that. We want naming rights to the new wing, the Ashford Research Center at the Chen Museum. We want recognition for our contribution." "That seems reasonable. And," Victor continued, "we want to partner with you on something bigger. We've been quietly exploring the possibility of commercial deep-sea mining. Nothing exploitative, we're talking about extracting minerals from international waters in ways that minimize environmental impact. Your submarine, your story, has shown it's possible. We want your expertise and your name attached to the project." There it was. The catch. Rebecca had spent 5 years learning about ocean mining, its potential and its dangers. Done responsibly, it could provide essential minerals without the human rights and environmental costs of land-based mining. Done poorly, it could devastate ecosystems we barely understood. "I'll need time to consider," Rebecca said, "and I'll need complete transparency about your methods, your environmental protocols, everything." "Of course. We wouldn't expect anything less." Victor handed her his card. "Think about it. We believe you could be the bridge between industry and conservation. Someone who understands both the practical realities and the ethical imperatives." After he left, Rebecca found Lily waiting by the exhibition hall. At 13, her daughter had grown into a serious young woman who volunteered at the museum every weekend and talked about studying environmental engineering. "Who was that?" Lily asked. "Someone offering us a lot of money to put our name on something that might be good or might be terrible. I'm not sure which yet." "So, you'll research it completely before deciding," Lily said. It wasn't a question. She knew her mother. "Yeah, baby, that's exactly what I'll do." They walked through the conference's exhibition hall together, looking at displays about underwater robotics, deep-sea biology, ocean conservation. 5 years ago, Rebecca wouldn't have understood half of this. She'd had to educate herself frantically, learning about things she'd never had the luxury to care about when she was worried about electricity bills. At one booth, a young woman was presenting research on rare earth element deposits. She couldn't have been more than 25, but she spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to be in these spaces. "Excuse me," the woman said, noticing Rebecca. "You're Rebecca Chen, from the submarine story." "That's me. I'm Dr. Sarah Michaels. I wrote my dissertation on sustainable deep-sea mining practices. Your discovery helped revive interest in the field and in doing it responsibly. I just wanted to say thank you. Your story inspired me when I was considering dropping out of my PhD program." Rebecca felt the familiar mix of pride and discomfort. She was still getting used to being someone whose story inspired people. "What made you want to drop out?" Rebecca asked. Sarah's confidence wavered. "I grew up poor. My family thought college was a waste of time. When I got into grad school, I felt like an imposter, like everyone could tell I didn't belong. Then I read about you, how you trusted yourself when everyone said you were wrong. It helped me trust myself too." Rebecca reached out and squeezed Sarah's hand. "You belong here. Never doubt that. And if you ever need support, funding, advice, anything, the Chen Foundation has programs for exactly that." After Sarah walked away beaming, Lily looked at her mother thoughtfully. You changed her life without even knowing her." "Yeah," Rebecca said softly. That's the weirdest part about all this. The money is nice, but this helping people I'll never meet, inspiring people just by being visible, this is the real treasure. That night, back in their home, a modest house, Rebecca had bought not in the wealthiest neighborhood, but in the one where Lily could keep her same friends. Rebecca reviewed the Ashford Foundation's proposal. She'd brought in Jennifer, her lawyer, who'd become a close friend over the years. It's a lot of money, Jennifer said, spreading financial projections across the dining room table. 20 million for the museum expansion. Another 30 million for the research fellowship program. But Becca, I'm worried about the deep-sea mining partnership. That's where the real money is for them, billions. Potentially. They want your name to legitimize it. I know. But what if they're genuinely trying to do it? Right. What if I could ensure they followed proper protocols? You can't ensure anything unless you have real power in the venture. Advisory roles mean nothing. They can ignore you and still use your name. Rebecca nodded. Jennifer was right, as usual. So what do I ask for? Equity, real ownership stake, board seat, veto power over extraction sites and methods. Make them give you actual control, not just a fancy title. Over the next weeks, Rebecca negotiated harder than she'd ever negotiated anything. Victor Ashford seemed surprised at first. Perhaps he'd expected the former waitress to be grateful for whatever was offered. But Rebecca had learned she could be grateful and demanding simultaneously. The final deal gave her a 15% equity stake in Ashford Marine Resources, a board position, and explicit veto power over any extraction site or method she deemed environmentally unsound. The museum funding came with no strings attached beyond naming rights, and the fellowship program would be administered entirely by the Chen Foundation, not by Ashford. You drive a hard bargain, Victor said when they signed the agreements. I learned from people who tried to take advantage of me, Rebecca replied. I don't forget those lessons. But the project brought unexpected complications. Environmental groups that had once celebrated Rebecca's story now criticized her for partnering with industry. Former waitress sells out ocean for profit. Read one headline. Protesters appeared at the museum, calling her a hypocrite. Rebecca invited the protest leaders inside for a conversation. They came warily, expecting platitudes or dismissal. Instead, she showed them the contracts, the environmental protocols, the safeguards she'd insisted on. I understand your concerns, Rebecca said. I share them. But here's what I've learned: the deep-sea mining is going to happen whether I'm involved or not. China and Russia are already doing it, with zero environmental oversight. American companies will follow. The question isn't whether to mine the ocean floor. The question is whether to do it destructively or responsibly. And you think Ashford will do it responsibly? One protester challenged. Not because they're good people, but because I have veto power. Every site requires my approval. Every method requires my sign-off. I've hired independent environmental monitors, whose reports come directly to me. If they violate protocols, I can shut down entire operations. Why should we trust you? Rebecca looked at the young activists, most of them college students, passionate and committed. She saw herself in them, or rather who she might have been if she'd had the luxury of caring about abstract principles when she was worried about keeping the lights on. You shouldn't trust me automatically, Rebecca said. Trust but verify. I'm publishing all our environmental impact assessments publicly. I'm inviting independent audits. I'm opening our operations to scrutiny in ways most industries never do. Watch me. Hold me accountable. If I fail to protect the ocean, expose me. I've given you the tools to do it. That won some of them over. Others remained skeptical, which Rebecca respected. Healthy skepticism kept people honest. The first mining operation began 18 months later in international waters, extracting rare earth elements from polymetallic nodules on the seafloor. Rebecca insisted on being present, descending in a submarine to witness the process firsthand. The ocean at 3,000 meters was an alien world. Her lights revealed strange creatures, jellyfish like living stained glass, fish with teeth longer than their bodies. Communities of life clustered around hydrothermal vents. It was beautiful and terrifying and humbling. "This is what we're risking," Rebecca said to the pilot, a veteran ocean engineer named Marcus. "Every time we take from the ocean, we're gambling with things we don't fully understand." "True," Marcus said, "but we're also gambling with human civilization. Without rare earth elements, we can't build renewable energy technology, can't make electric vehicles or wind turbines or solar panels. We need these materials to combat climate change. It's a choice between different kinds of environmental impact." Rebecca had wrestled with this paradox constantly. There were no perfect choices, only least bad options. The trick was staying honest about the trade-offs. The extraction went smoothly. The nodules were collected using methods that minimized seafloor disruption. Environmental monitors reported acceptable impact levels. It wasn't perfect, nothing was, but it was better than the alternatives. Back on the surface, Rebecca filed her first public report. She was honest about the impacts, honest about the uncertainties, honest about her own conflicted feelings. The media attention was intense. "Most corporate board members would never admit doubt," one interviewer said. "They just spin everything as positive." "I'm not most board members," Rebecca replied. "I'm someone who knows what it's like to struggle, who knows that real people are affected by these decisions. I owe it to them and to my daughter to be honest." Lily, watching from the green room, felt a surge of pride. Her mother had become someone important, someone powerful, but she'd stayed herself still honest, still questioning, still fighting for what was right even when it was complicated. At 15, Lily had started thinking about her own future. She'd always assumed she'd follow her mother into marine science or conservation. But lately, she'd been drawn to something else: advocacy, policy, the legal frameworks that governed how humans interacted with the natural world. "Mom," she said one evening, "I think I want to be a lawyer, like Jennifer, but focused on environmental law." Rebecca looked at her daughter, seeing the serious young woman she was becoming. "That's a great path. But Lily, you don't have to choose now. You're 15. You can change your mind 1,000 times." "I know, but I've been thinking about it a lot. You found treasure by accident. That's amazing. But imagine if we had better laws protecting ocean resources from the start. Imagine if we had systems that rewarded conservation instead of exploitation. That's where I could make a difference." Rebecca pulled Lily close. "You're already making a difference. And yeah, baby, you'd be an incredible environmental lawyer. You've got the brains for it, the passion. And you've learned from watching me that you don't have to choose between idealism and practicality. Is that what you think you do? Balance idealism and practicality?" "I think I try. Some days I succeed. Other days I feel like I'm just muddling through, trying not to screw up too badly." Lily laughed. "That's pretty much what everyone's doing, Mom. You're just more honest about it." The museum's expansion opened 3 years after Rebecca's initial deal with Ashford. The new wing was stunning: interactive exhibits, working laboratories where students could conduct real research, a fellowship program that had already supported 47 students from low-income backgrounds. At the opening ceremony, Rebecca stood with people whose lives had intersected with hers in unexpected ways. Dave, who'd used his share of the submarine, proceeds to start a marine salvage training program for at-risk youth. Mrs. Park, now in her 80s, who'd watched over Lily and who Rebecca had helped secure comfortable retirement. Frank, who'd transformed from cynical manager to passionate museum administrator. Patricia Morgan, whose research was finally getting the funding it deserved. But Rebecca also invited people who represented her old life, her former co-workers from the cannery, the diner, the cleaning company. These were people still struggling, still counting pennies, still working multiple jobs to survive. I want you to know, Rebecca said in her speech, looking directly at them, that I haven't forgotten where I came from. This museum, this foundation, everything we've built, it exists because I understand what it means to have nothing, to be dismissed and overlooked, to make desperate choices because you've run out of good options. She paused, gathering her thoughts. 5 years ago, I spent $50 I couldn't afford on a submarine I didn't need, because I was tired of playing it safe and still losing. That's not a lesson I want people to learn, that you should gamble what you can't afford to lose. But it is a lesson in believing you deserve more than what you've been given. The real treasure wasn't the minerals in that submarine. It was learning I was capable of more than I'd been told, that my instincts were worth trusting, that I could fight for myself and win. That's what I want this museum to teach, not that treasure is waiting in submarines, but that you are more capable than anyone has told you. Your struggles don't make you weak. They make you strong enough to do impossible things. The applause was thunderous, but what moved Rebecca most was seeing her former co-workers crying, seeing recognition in their eyes, seeing them believe, maybe for the first time, that their lives could change too. After the ceremony, a young woman approached. She was maybe 23, dressed in interview clothes that were clean but worn, carrying herself with the careful pride of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. "Miss Chen, I'm Maria. You met me 5 years ago when I was 15. You talked to me about my father, Carlos, who tried to steal from your submarine," Rebecca remembered. "Maria, you were volunteering here for a while. How are you?" "I just graduated from college. Environmental science, full scholarship. I'm interviewing for graduate programs now. I wanted to thank you. You could have hated my father, could have refused to meet with me because of what he did. Instead, you gave me a chance. Your father made mistakes, but you weren't responsible for them. You deserved your own chance." "That's what you said then." "I didn't really believe it, but I do now. And Miss Chen, I'm going to spend my career making sure people like my father, people who feel like they have to steal or cheat because the system's rigged against them, have better options. Because you showed me that's possible." After Maria left, Lily appeared at Rebecca's side. "That was beautiful, Mom. But can I tell you something I've been thinking about? Always. Sometimes I worry that your story gives people false hope. You bought a submarine and found millions. But that's not going to happen to most people. What if they try to take chances and lose everything? What if your story encourages recklessness?" It was a fair question, one Rebecca had asked herself. "You're right," Rebecca said. "My story is unusual. Most people who spend their last $50 don't find 40 million. But here's what I hope people take from it. Not that treasure is waiting if you just take chances, but that you don't have to accept other people's assessment of your worth. That you can trust your instincts, even when everyone says you're wrong. That struggling doesn't mean you're failing, it means you're fighting. And sometimes you lose those fights," Lily said. "Yes, sometimes you do. But if you never fight at all, you've already lost. I'd rather teach people to fight smart than teach them not to fight at all." They stood together, looking at the museum, at the submarine gleaming in the evening light, at everything they'd built, from one desperate choice and $50. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Lily said quietly. "Not because you found treasure, but because of what you did with it. You could have just taken the money and disappeared. Instead, you built something that helps people." Rebecca felt tears threatening. "You know what the craziest part is? I spent years thinking I was just surviving, barely getting by, not accomplishing anything. But all those years taught me exactly what I needed to know to do this. How to work hard, how to spot opportunity, how to fight for what's right, how to build something from nothing." "Maybe you weren't just surviving," Lily suggested. "Maybe you were preparing." Rebecca considered that. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe every difficult shift, every dismissive customer, every bill she'd juggled and crisis she'd weathered had been training for this moment. Not the moment of finding treasure, but the moment of knowing what to do with it. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the water gold. The submarine that had changed everything sat in its place of honor, no longer a vessel of desperation, but a symbol of possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: environmental reviews, board meetings, scholarship, applications to evaluate, problems to solve. But tonight, Rebecca Chen stood with her daughter in a place they'd built together, proof that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was believe you deserved more than survival. She'd bought a submarine for $50. She'd found millions inside. But the real treasure, the one that couldn't be measured in dollars, was learning she'd always had what she needed to succeed. It had just taken a half-sunken submarine to show her. And that, Rebecca thought as she locked up the museum and headed home with Lily, was a treasure worth any price. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.